San Diego, it's already March. Dude, here's what's cool about that is that we finally are getting some data points in to kind of speak truth to the story of like how bad Q4 actually might have been in San Diego County. And then also new administration, new policies. How is that affecting our San Diego market locally in real time, kind of creating that false start in the otherwise hot bottle rocket cannon fodder that was supposed to be coming out of the gates for 25.
Yeah, yeah. And the result of that lull we're seeing pop out on the money side too. Some really new, fun, creative stuff coming down the pipe. So we'll talk about that.
Let's do this. So, dude, San Diego has been so resilient, right? Like 23, despite all the money, crap, economy, worries, stuff that was going on. I think we were peddling like 8.5 interest rates for a minute. You know, still made almost 10% that year in 23 countywide. Last year, again, very similar. We had the lowest transaction count since 95, and we still made like 8 or 9%. But, well, it turns out that the new numbers are finally in. Looks like San Diego values are down.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that,
You
Jesse.
should be as a homeowner, because here's the truth. I'm still bullish on 25 bigger picture, but we're in a little moment right now. Like metaphorically, it almost kind of feels like there's like the puddle, right? That might be seasonally specific, right? Little rain puddle, and all the new feet are all kind of stepping in it, and they're bringing up the murk, and they're making it tough. So, you know, top of funnel activity, which we would refer to as like amount of people coming through the open houses, like, you know, agents getting tours signed up from people that want to actually do something this year. Those numbers are all fantastical.
That's great.
Like big time numbers. Open houses, you're seeing it. We're actually seeing a ton of open houses now. I'm sure checking this on your free apps and everything. But what's not happening is the alligator arms of the buyers are starting to stunt the sort of truncated hand motion, which normally breaks out the checkbook and strokes the big check when you start seeing big numbers on that top of funnel. And we're not seeing that right now across the county.
Little T-Rex arms.
That's right.
Yeah. So interestingly, what we're seeing now in the market is loan volume is down.
Which is a good thing, right?
Right.
Because
and so what's happening there with the silver lining, this is really interesting. New programs are allowing for buyers that haven't been able to get in to actually get in. And so let's talk about how that plays in with this real estate data, right? What if more homes are coming on the market? What if we're going to start to see a little bit of softening in pricing? Are you going to be able to get in there and take advantage? People who've already bought. So who's left? The folks that have either decided not to buy or felt like they couldn't buy. And so on the wholesale lending side, one thing that we're seeing, a bunch of new programs that are coming out that are allowing folks. Let me give you an example. You're a self-employed borrower and you've only been doing it 1 year. Well, in a traditional market, that actually might not be allowed. You might not be able to get that loan. And so we're seeing these new programs open up to allow for all kinds of different circumstances. Airbnb, one of your rental properties, but you don't have it on the books for very long. What do you do then? You want to buy an Airbnb, but the regular rents don't price out. What do you do then? So we're starting to see all these new programs come out that are really being creative to fill the space. Let's be honest. The lenders want more loans, so they're willing to take on a little more risk than they used to. And we're starting to see that fill more of a pipeline of buyers who now have access to these homes that didn't otherwise.
How are lenders actually looking at Airbnb income? I'm super curious about this because, and you might not know the answer. I'm
You think I don't know the answer?
you on the spot right now.
Yeah.
But like, because of the requirement that the city has, and you know, each different city is kind of doing their own thing, and that dust is still settling too, to have a permit, right? So let's just say, let's come up with a scenario. Let's say someone's selling a home that is already an Airbnb. Okay. So they have like, numbers that they can support, right? But we all know that that license is tied to the then vacating owner.
Okay.
So then the new buyer would have to come in, and it's not just like, hey, copy paste, that's going to be the income, because they would then have to go and apply and get the permit approved as well to operate as an Airbnb and to be able to have that sort of 3x, which is kind of the rule of thumb versus long-term rents.
Yeah.
So how does a lender approach that?
Yeah, a couple different ways. One is a more traditional mechanism, which is, hey, what does that place rent for on its own?
Okay.
Let's take a little piece of that. We'll apply it to the math, and you can afford it or you can't.
Okay.
Some more non-traditional mechanisms. There's actually a little, like, if you have a rent calculator, like a standard rent calculator, there's some websites out there that'll do that. There's also a website out there that'll do this for Airbnb. So it calculates what kind of income you have potential for a particular property based on the address and the neighborhood and that sort of thing. You can use those kind of data depending on what kind of program you're using and whether the entire property is planning on being Airbnb'd or just say an ADU.
Interesting.
That's going to change the parameters because, of course, you're qualifying to buy the main home.
Right.
And then what's this little thing look like? So permitting can be important, again, depending on the history of the property and the lender that you're working with.
And where it is.
Where it is and history. So can you scrub up some numbers? That can often move the needle a little bit in your favor. What about insurance?
Well, it's official. No insurance companies are actually doing business inside of California anymore. So kind of true, thankfully not exactly true, but man, I'll tell you, like, this is the zeitgeist of the moment right now. We were even saying this sort of in passing, like last year, the big news headline was all the NAR settlement, right? Which is so funny because whenever there are lawsuits and things like that, that are consumer protection based and oriented, what you're looking for is there's a straight line with all this BS that is then going to have a net effect benefit help on John Q. public consumer.
Yeah.
Boy, has that not been the case.
Not at all.
With the whole NAR settlement. The shortest answer, even though I'm at the risk of maybe get myself in trouble on this, is not really much has changed. Like at the end of the day, yeah, there's like 5 to 10 more pieces of documentation. Thank you, lawyers.
Right.
That we have to do on an already ridiculously overstacked doc thing to get in or out of a home. But ultimately, even though the buyers are now responsible for the compensation for their agent, in this case now, not commissions anymore. That's a bad word. It's now concessions, because that changes everything. Right. But at the end of the day, it's still coming off of the net that the buyer is bringing. The buyers brought the money before. The buyers are bringing the money now after. And there's an extra little loop that comes around with the jig and the zag and the when. At the end of the day, sellers are still probably seeing the value of compensating a potential buyer candidate that's asking for that concession. You get the idea. So again, the pan back up, your butt hits the top of the ceiling. It kind of behaves about the same as it was pre-settlement. However, it almost felt like a magic trick, right? What's a great magician do? They're like, hey, look at my left hand, look at my left hand. Meanwhile, the actual trick is taking place over on the right. This is the thing that we were saying all of last year, is that the biggest risk right now impacting the real estate industry is not that.
No.
It's the insurance gang. Okay. Now, this is not some like big headline secret. We're all living this and we've all been experiencing this, but it's not like this thing happened and then it kind of settled out. The thing happened and it's getting worse over time. So what we're doing now, we're having to do now, I should better say, is we're having to pre-engineer for insurance binders, which is to say, not all of the insurance companies empirically out there are even comfortable doing business in California anymore. And then it becomes a case-by-case, place-by-place, HOA by HOA type of situation. So an extra level of added engineering is that we have to basically sort of pre-qual, if you will, different insurance companies that are comfortable writing binders on these properties. And if you don't do that, then you're asking for trouble.
So Are you doing that on the sales side?
On the sales
yeah,
side.
not a lot of people are doing that. I can tell you that.
On the sales side, we're doing it to help protect all parties, but definitely our seller. Because as the old game goes, normally it's like the first, round of offers that you get are usually your best ones. And if there is capitulation and fallout and attrition inside the transaction, now you're running back to that same pool of people you just said no to. You're pandering to get them back in. Now there are things like, potential home inspections that are now party to the disclosure. And now the buyer pool knows about things that maybe the original pool didn't know about. And so you're starting to kind of erode away at that initial base that you had. It's a lot of words to say you don't want to have that happen inside the transaction if you can help it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, just like a lending pre-approval, it's not a commitment to lend just because you got a pre-approval, from your mortgage broker over here. Same thing is true with insurance companies. Just because you have those calls and you set those properties specifically up for success doesn't mean that they're going to write. But it's like setting yourself up statistically for a higher likelihood that you don't have fallout by doing that extra work.
Well, I love it. I love to hear that you're doing that. I didn't know that, because on the buyer side, we're running into a very different situation where when a buyer knows that their insurance is going to be part of their cost of that home, how do you know how much your home is going to cost? They call me and they say, well, what's the rate? What's the payment? But that's only part of it, right? We know what the taxes are. We know what the rates are. But the mystery number now is insurance. So how do you make sure that you understand how much that home is going to cost? And what we've been doing on the buyer side is as soon as a client is attracted to a property, we're getting an insurance person that we know involved who says, hey, I think it's going to cost this much to insure that property.
Or whether the fair plan is going to be needed to bolt on, which sometimes can almost feel like double insurance on a monthly basis.
Oh, yeah, it's expensive. And so it's important to know that, because if your property is going to cost $100 a month to insure versus $500 a month to insure, you may actually fall out of qualification for that particular property.
It's real.
And I don't think people understand that. And so going into this, we always talk about this. Insurance used to be an afterthought.
Yep.
Now it's a forethought.
Yep.
It's one of the first things you want to do. And it's important that as a buyer or seller, which I love, that's an opportunity now to be more advanced, more proactive, and ensure that the transactions are going to work the way you hope they do.
You're absolutely right. It used to be a given, and now it's a variable that you have to account for, both on the buy side and on the sell side in 25.
What's wrong, Jesse?
Well, the word is now out. As a seller, you're no longer probably going to sell your home in the first 5 minutes that it goes on the market.
That sounds like pretty bad news.
What it is it's about having a plan and managing expectations. Yeah. And then here's the other big lead that's buried in there, almost to the point of it being insidious, which is for so long, agents, shingle-wielding folks who do damn good, have successful numbers and play at a pretty high level, don't actually have a plan in place for the home not selling right away. So it's almost like they've gotten bad habits where, we've always playfully referred to it as the 4 Ps, right? You price it as low as you can, right? And then you put a sign in the yard, and then you put it up on the MLS, and then you pray some other agent comes along and sells it for you. Right. And that methodology has actually worked to a pretty good tune to make listing agents look like they're doing a pretty damn good job when really it was just the market.
Yeah.
Right. So now it's like, okay, that might still happen. It's not like homes aren't selling the first weekend. It's like that's still a possibility. But planning for an entire pre-list phase that then brings the momentum up to sort of that boil to when you're launching and you're doing that open house weekend, that first weekend on the market, we truly need to call it a launch party so that hopefully you are having those top of funnel numbers where you're like, the place is just like overridden with people bumping into each other, triggering the FOMO, playing on people's psychological principles, right? Of consistency and emotional vestige and not only just getting the place sold, but hopefully doing so still in a multiple offer situation. There's a lot of sort of engineering and science and art that needs to go into that, making that happen, full stop. But then that not being that opening salvo not being the only feature of the marketing plan. It's like, okay, well then what?
Yeah, and this is all happening at the lunch party.
Or the launch party.
Oh, launch party.
I mean, there could be sandwiches and soups and salad as part of it, right? But no, launch party, thank you, Jared, if I misspoke.
No.
But like, it's like then, okay, after the first part, now let's say you don't have an offer. It's like, okay, then what, right? And knowing still in an equally strategic way how you can deploy assets to be able to keep the eyeballs alive. And this is a model that I use. It's a nice mental model. It's basically an XY axis, and it's got 4 columns operating in a descending order. So that top column is eyeballs, and that's all of the look-sees that you're getting out there on all of the free apps, the MLS itself. You probably have private branded listing pages where you're couching all your stuff and sending all your traffic to. You have to do everything possible to remain the belle of the ball on those eyeballs numbers, because as soon as that falls off, you got no shot at the rest of them because the tiers erode as they go, right? So you got to do everything you can to keep the foot on the gas on the eyeballs, which then turn into showings. Not everybody that sees it's going to come see it. Sees it, you got it, right? Sees it, come see it, right? That's the showings. And then after that, the critical gap is to then chatter. Chatter is basically like they went and saw it, and the agent's calling me afterwards. They're like, hey, what's the deal with this one? You got any offers? Like, oh, good. Tell me about your buyer. And you're kind of starting to get those emblematic conversations in place fundamentally that are working toward that last section, which is the offer. And if the offer piece is no longer the given anymore, it's like, how do you then reverse engineer all those other 3 columns and keep those propped up? Because the only other tool in all these agents' toolbox are price adjustments. And it's like, okay, we know that's there. And sometimes you do. You just get the price wrong. You got to adjust. You want to make it surgical so that you can flip the script and you're not convincing the marketplace and showing your poker hand. You're compelling them so that even though you did an adjustment, they're actually coming back towards you again, and then maybe even re-triggering the multiple offer situation. But it's like the vigilance are the eyeballs and the showings. And you got to take full responsibility for those 2 columns if you want the other 2 to go well.
It's funny hearing you talk about that. It reminds me a lot of what we do on the buyer's finance side. One of the critical things that I think is really important when you're a buyer is not only having your pre-approval, but having your backup plan ready. You said it. What happens if it falls out? Right? So let me give you an example. You go to a bank and the loan doesn't work out. What's next? That's it, man. That was their program. That was their loan. Program. And
because they're trying to take you and put you into their product suite.
They have one.
Right.
They have one.
Right.
Sometimes they're called different things, but generally speaking, they have one set of underwriting guidelines.
Right.
And so what we do on the wholesale side is we take that first plan and multiply it out among several different lenders.
That's right.
And what that allows us to do, it just rarely happens, but if it does happen where something gets funky, we can go to the next guy, the next guy, the next guy.
And it's not a cold chisel where it's like, oh, crap, something happened. Well, let me quickly then start over from zero again, right? Like you've got a couple in the hopper there where you can be fleet-footed and quickly maneuver if need be.
Right. And so that's the genius of having multiple different lending options, but also having a conduit. We are the controller of that, just like you guys are on the selling side. Like we have all the client's documents. And so it's literally a matter of just calling someone else.
Sometimes even the appraisal.
Yeah, and it can go fast.
That's right.
So backup plans, contingencies, I love those concepts right now in a more unsure market.
Yeah. And that's the game, guys, that's well played, right? It's like when you're choosing your team, right? And the 2 people atop the team are going to be your mortgage broker and your real estate team partner, is how many moves down the chessboard with their experiential capital, with their competence, with the fact that they've seen that before, they've lived it and navigated it before. How many moves down the chessboard is your team currently playing so that when the you-know-what hits the fan, because guess what, gangs? It always does hit the fan. You actually have the ability to still get that deal done by not only managing the seller and their expectations and keeping them nourished, but then also being able to perform at a clip so that you can actually still preserve a lot of the contract timelines and guidelines that you agreed to on the contract in the first place.
Yeah, agreed. But what if I'm not ready to buy or sell right now? Good news on that. We have buyers classes. We have sellers classes. We have one-on-one workshops if you have a particular scenario you want to work out. So don't forget to check in on us. You can go to the websies. You can call. However you want to get in contact with us. Let us know what your situation is. We'll let you know what a good fit for one of these free informational courses are, or heck, just a phone call.